And we are live with the Galileo Podcast. My name's Jay, and I'm here with one of our esteemed new players and special guest star, Brian. And Brian is one of the newer players on our game who's just joined within the past few weeks. But I also know Brian from our task group here in Obsidian Fleet. And it's a pleasure to have him on board. We've got actually a pretty fun lineup today. And we've got a few topics that we're going to cover. We're going to be talking about some of our characters that we play on the game. We're going to be moving into talking about different sims, specifically the Galileo and the Portland. We're also going to talk about some of our newsletter articles and some of the out-of-character work we also do, specifically writing articles and putting in submissions on RPG websites. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about MMORPGs and the world that is Star Trek Online. So it should be pretty fun, should be pretty exciting. So I thank you all for listening, and we're going to get right into it. So Brian, you're our special guest, and if you don't mind, I'd like you to take a few minutes, kind of introduce yourself, talk about your role-playing history, talk about some of the characters that you play, and talk about your time here in Obsidian Fleet.
All right. My name is Brian. I am 27 years old, and I work in a factory at a very large aerospace company where I move heavy boxes in and out of a very big freezer. And that's what I do for a living. So doing that means that the one character in simming that I will never play is a quartermaster, because I pretty much do that in real life, and they have to pay me to do that. So I'm not going to do that in my spare time.
Don't mix work with pleasure, right?
No. Well, and if they have to pay me to do it, why am I gonna? I'm not having fun, right? If they have to pay you to do something, chances are you're not enjoying it. But my character on the Galileo is Tula. She is a doctor. She is actually one of the first characters I've played when I returned to simming. I was doing a lot of simming between about 2005, 2007, back when I was in university, and eventually I dropped out of it because I just didn't have enough time in the day anymore to stay up to date and stay active in simming. So I dropped out of it for a while, and I pretty much completely forgot about simming at all, forgot that it even existed for about 5 years. And in the meantime, though, I had taken up tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeon World, games like that. So I kind of have some experience coming at it that way too, coming back to simming, but also bringing in with me some of the experiences that I've gotten from playing and DMing in tabletop games. So it's an interesting experience coming back to simming. In about 2012, I remembered again that simming exists, and I decided to jump back into it, and I created a new character. Tula was actually my first character when I returned to simming. She started out on the USS Britannia. That kind of ended badly. Wound up bouncing around a fair bit into 3 or 4 different ships before finally settling in here on the USS Galileo. The interesting thing, though, is that this version of Tula is actually quite different from the previous versions, because I was thinking about applying for the Galileo, so was Agnes, who plays Yana, her twin sister, and we decided, you know what? Let's work together on a BIOS. Let's make our characters interesting. Let's make them, twins, but different. Let's make them both unique characters and work together on making them. And we kind of went to like high school stereotypes, right? Like the nerdy kid, the preppy kid, the goth kid, that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, Tula basically wound up being the goth one. So that was a big change for this character, jumping to the jumping to the Galileo from the Elysium, and also little changes like adding in a twin sister, making her a little younger to make it more realistic that she's a medical officer instead of a chief medical officer, that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I've been enjoying playing Tula for a little while now. She's a very interesting character to play, as I'm sure most of the most of the people who've been reading my posts know, is that she is in a wheelchair. She had a shuttle accident a few years back, and I think that's very, it's very interesting, and it's something that you have to do a lot of research and think a lot about when you're playing the character. And I find that to be rather interesting. And I think that's actually probably a good idea for when you're playing any character who's not of the same ethnic group or same gender, that sort of thing, especially when you have people who are disadvantaged in society, right? Like people who are minorities, people who are oppressed in some way or who are discriminated against in some way. It's important to make sure you do your research so that you're not portraying them in a ridiculous, stereotypical manner. But yeah, it's been fun playing Tula over the past few years, and I've had a lot of fun jumping into the Galileo here, and the really high activity, fast-paced environment here really allows me to explore the character a lot more detailed and in depth and quicker than in a lot of other sims.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we're really glad to have you on board. We've all been reading your posts, obviously, and they've been great. And it's kind of like you mentioned with Tula, she's a really interesting character, just from like the original concept, and the way you kind of worked with Agnes to flesh her out, to create that kind of tandem. That I guess that twin tandem. Is really fascinating to me, and I think that whole angle that you're playing her as a character with disability is also really fascinating, and it's something you really don't see on a lot of Sims, because it's it is a bit of a challenge, both in real life for people who have disabilities, but also to play a character who has disabilities, especially if you don't have them. And like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head. It does take a lot of research. It takes a lot of out of character thought and a lot of time and a lot of patience to kind of not only come up with the concept, but put the effort in and the time in to write that character as realistically as as possible. And I think so far you've done a great job. I mean, I've been nothing but impressed. So yeah, I mean,
Thanks.
I think you're off to a fantastic start, and I can't wait to see kind of how she develops as a character and as a person in the coming months. I think it'll be really fun. And
Yeah.
and that said, though, sorry, I do have to bring up one small issue. I think you sent me a message. What was it? What was it earlier today? We were in a chat room, and you mentioned that she was doing surgery on a tribble. Right.
Yeah.
So I kind of got to ask, now is this a dead tribble that had died that she's doing surgery on, or are we just going kind of all types of, evil experimentation type of, animal rights violation stuff that's happening in sickbay?
No. See, one of the interesting things about Tula is, despite her, goth style and her collection of bone saws and antique catheters and all that kind of fun stuff, she actually really loves animals. And if she didn't become a doctor, she'd have probably become a veterinarian. So I'm thinking Tribble maybe got caught up in some circuitry in the replicator somewhere, and now she's got a little patient with burns over 60% of his body. She's got to fix him up. Do basically what she would do for any human patient, and yeah. And the other thing too is you got to shave off that singed fur, so we might even see what's underneath all the fur of the Tribble.
I'm guessing there would be skin there.
Yeah, probably it's not just a sentient hairball rolling around or like a tumbleweed or something.
Right. Yeah, I found that kind of fun, and I actually do peek at some of the JPs in progress from time to time, whenever I get bored. So it's always kind of fun to see kind of the things that are in progress and the work that people are doing and the ideas that they have.
Yeah.
So Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I mean, obviously, we've got so many triples on the ship right now that if
Yeah.
we have to use one to sacrifice it for the greater good, I think no one's really going to object.
Oh no, well,
So,
Tula might object to that, with her love of animals and medical ethics. That's a little bit of an iffy ethical situation for her. So she may object to that.
it is. Yeah, you're kind of getting into that strange territory. What is it called? Biomedical ethics, kind of like you
Yeah.
mentioned. Yeah, that's a tough one. But I think that's kind of the beauty of being on a sim is that we get to explore those issues. There's really
Oh yeah.
no like right or wrong way to do it. All of our characters are going to react in a certain type of way.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's not like we're going to have like real world consequences,
Yeah.
for anything like that. So.
Well, I do think that that's a really good point, and I do think that it's great to explore some issues and even explore some of the heavier issues because Star Trek in itself has explored a lot of heavy issues in its day. Going back to Captain Kirk kissing Uhura and then getting tons of hate mail from crazy rednecks about mixing other races. Oh no! But
Oh yeah, definitely.
I do have I do have some plans up my sleeve to kind of explore those as we kind of flesh out the character a little bit more, go into the whole relationship with Zoot and that kind of thing. But I don't know if it's better to keep that under my hat for now, or I don't believe spoilers really spoil anything. I read a really good article about how spoilers don't actually make things less enjoyable, but I know some people like to preserve the feeling of surprise. So maybe I won't go into too much detail on those.
Yeah, just keep it under wraps for now.
Yeah.
I'm definitely one of those guys who tries to I play everything close to the vest, so I don't really reveal a lot. Like especially with our missions and kind of what's going on now. Uh, I've never really revealed the plot to anybody in advance. So like people who know the entire plot are myself, Tom, and Kate. And that's just because we are the game masters on the sim, and we need to know what the plot is in case one of us has to disappear for a while so that someone else can take over. Um,
Yeah.
but like you said, it's a lot of it's personal preference. So some people don't
Yeah.
mind. Other people feel it's kind of kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it. But
Yeah. Well, I find I'm the complete opposite. I'll tell anyone anything. As one example, I was running a D&D game a little while ago, and a new player, didn't really know the culture of D&D, asked, okay, how much HP does this monster have left? And one of the older players starts getting up in her grill, being like, you shouldn't be asking that. That's not really something that the DM should be telling the players, and he goes on. And then I just look at her and I say, 234.
And then there was an outrage, and then all hell broke loose. And the
No.
table got flipped over, and people started fighting.
Yeah, well, I find that, I find personally I don't mind telling people if they ask something, and I think sometimes it can be good if we all know where we're going, we can kind of do some more foreshadowing and that kind of stuff, and you don't wind up getting caught up not knowing where to go and being afraid to contribute or go the wrong way, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Um, all right, so yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for kind of talk about your character. Like I said, I really look forward to kind of seeing how she develops and what type of relationships she builds with a lot of the other characters on the game. And I think it's fun.
I think she's already got a bit of a start with Luke there, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh yeah, Luke. He's like Luke's he's a great guy. Like in character, Luke's he's got that Marine Corps background.
Yeah.
He's he's one of the older characters on the game. I think he's like 35.
Yeah.
And he started off as an NCO, so he's kind of got a little more of that down to earth kind of mentality, I think, than you see with a lot of like the fresh officers on board.
Yeah.
And so yeah, he's definitely a real interesting character. He does his job real well, so I think she'll like him.
Yeah, well,
That
if
should be a
they
lot of fun.
if the stars align and all that stuff, I think they actually would make an interesting couple in a sort of opposites attract way.
Yeah, right. That's the fun thing, about simming. A lot of times, like, we really don't know if something's going to work until we try it. So,
Yeah.
The best part is actually getting to try it out and see how it works out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is a good point to segue into our next section. And you wanted to talk a little bit about Sims, right? Different Sims, especially your own, because you also have a Sim within our task group here in 72A. You run the Miranda class sim called the USS Portland.
Yeah.
And you're actually, I think, what are you on, your 4th month of being a CO?
Yeah, we started in April. I mean, I was a CO of an independent sim briefly a while back, but you know how it is with independent sims and having trouble recruiting and lacking support and tend to die off. It was actually a long story involving trying to pick up the wreckage of a sim that fell apart. And we did go for a couple of months, but eventually died out. But the Portland, other than that, is my first command. It's Miranda class. It's been running since April. It's as you said, it's in 72A, so we're in the same task group there. And it's I found it's a very interesting ship, and it's been a very interesting experience running a ship. We've got a lot of interesting backstories and interesting plots. I've got some great players who aren't afraid to jump in and throw in wacky side plots. We have, well, you know, a lot of the side plots tend to involve relationships too. So we have right now Agnes, who is also on the Galileo, who plays Yana. Her character, my XO, had just knocked up the Admiral's daughter, so that's something that we're going to have to deal with at some point. We've got another character going through Pon Farr right now. We've got some background with Bajoran religious stuff because my character is a Bajoran, an ex-Bajoran refugee, and it's a very interesting sim. You know, the other interesting thing I think about it is that because I'm basically a Luddite who hasn't learned anything new about simming since about 2005, it's a play-by-forum sim, which is rather rare in Obsidian Fleet. I think there's only a few of them, and most of them are run by the same few people.
It is kind of rare, and to be honest, I was really surprised when, well, I wasn't so much surprised when you joined and started a forum sim, but then when Agnes joined and also started a forum sim, we had 2 out of the, I think, 5 sims in our task group, which were forums, and we accounted for pretty much 90% of all the forum games in Obsidian Fleet. So I was wondering if there was like an upcoming trend or like a revival of forum games, you know. But I've always, I've always understood, at least in my opinion, that forums were kind of like the old school, more traditional way of doing simming, and it's kind of one of those methods where, regardless of the type of RPG that you play or the type of simming that you do or the genre, most people are familiar with forums and how forums work, whereas Nova and SMS are some of the newer systems that are out there, and they take a little bit of time to kind of learn and adapt to.
Yeah. Well, my thing was when I first came back to simming in 2012, right? I hadn't been simming since 2007, since the good old days before the rise of Nova. So I had basically only been familiar with forum sims. So at that time, I sought out the 1 or 2 forum. I put an application to 1 out of the 2 or 3 forum sims in Obsidian Fleet at the time, and that's how I got my start. Moved on to the Ares as well, which transitioned from Nova to a forum, and when I started my own, I decided to go with a forum. And to me, I think that there are, there's pros and cons. I haven't been a huge fan of Nova because I found it tricky to navigate, and I also found that it doesn't really have as much it's not really as encouraging of out-of-character discussion, right? You go to a forum sim, and you can see right on the front page, here's places where you can talk out of character, here's places where you can talk in character, this kind of thing. So I think forum sims do have a bit more options when it comes to community, when it comes to building community, with out-of-character forums that are right there, and with out-of-character spaces to discuss missions as they unfold. Because, as I said earlier, I'm a firm believer in letting players have information out of character and not hiding anything from them. So I can post up stuff on the forums about the mission, and it's also something so that you can avoid the sort of obligatory briefing scene, right? Because briefing scenes are kind of boring, and if you just post something up out of character, everybody's already up on what the mission is, and we can jump straight into the action rather than languishing in a briefing scene for a couple of weeks while we try to just go through the motions of starting the mission. So I think forums are really good for that kind of out-of-character information sharing, and part of it is just my personal preference for forums, and my being familiar with them from my experience simming. And I do think there are some disadvantages because forums weren't designed for simming, right? So there's some little workarounds that you have to do. You have to do like joint posts. You have to do little workarounds. You have to work on them by private message or in a different sub-forum and little things like that. But as somebody who has experience on forums, it's something that I'm familiar with, and I don't mind, doing those little workarounds as a forum moderator.
Yeah. I mean, those are all great points that you brought up. I think each system kind of has its pros and cons, and I think forums are great for out-of-character interaction. What we actually use here on Galileo to supplement Nova is our Yahoo groups list.
Yeah.
That's kind of like our primary out-of-character talking area. And it actually works wonders because it's an email-based system, so you don't even really need to log into Yahoo to be able to use it. You just type in the email address for our mailing list, write up whatever message that you want to send, and just blast it out, and it'll send it out to the whole group. I think in that sense it's kind of an intuitive feature. But you're right. Nova, first and foremost, is a content management system, more so than it is a device for out-of-character communication, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So what Nova will do, and what it does better than a forum, is it'll show you all the content for a sim, all of your Wikipedia stuff, all of your mission posts, all of your missions, and it'll organize it beautifully for you under a bunch of different tabs. It'll show your whole crew manifest for you, and it has that integrated instant messaging feature, or I guess the private messaging feature. But beyond that, it's not really so great for kind of like the out-of-character stuff. So I've always felt that, if you're going to use a Nova Sim, you got to have either a forum to back it up or a Yahoo group to back it up. Excuse me. Or in our case, what we're running now is we've got the Yahoo group list, and we've got this new chat room feature, which I was able to integrate with Nova. So I think, fortunately, we've kind of done a lot of trial and error. We figured out what has worked and what hasn't worked on our game, and we've kind of come to at least a pretty decent solution, I think, for the moment, where everybody who comes and plays on our sim and all of our guests kind of get to see a little bit of everything, and there's an opportunity for everybody to interact with each other, and I think that's the most important part. Obviously you're a CO, so you know the importance of being able to talk to and interact with your other players and kind of build up that RPG community. Actually, I want to ask you a question about Portland. Because there's so many, and this is something I ask a lot of different COs, and I always get varied answers, and it's always interesting how people answer these questions. But I wanted to ask, what exactly is Portland all about? Because, when we go to the Obsidian Fleet website and we go into the simulations listings, we see a huge list of close to 70 different sims. And we see some that are that are vacant, that don't have COs, and new.
Yeah.
They're looking for new players to take over. We see some that have like 4 crew maybe, and they're just fledgling sims just starting out. We see some star bases in there, starships, colony sims. We see all types of different games out there in Obsidian Fleet. So my question, and what I like to ask COs, is what makes your sim special? What makes your sim stand out from the rest of the sims in the huge list? Like, so for example, let's say you're a new player and you have no idea where to start. When you're looking through this giant list of sims, because I think we've all been there before.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
what is it about your game in Portland that makes it different from the rest of the sims out there?
Well, I think there's actually a few things that makes Portland a little bit unique. The first thing is, I think, our whole kind of raison d'etre, our whole reason to being, and this is something that's heavily emphasized in our rules and regulations and stuff, we're all about telling cool and interesting stories. That is number one. That's the first thing on my list of rules and everything. I think that's really why we're here for simming, and I think that needs to be emphasized, that we are here to tell cool and interesting stories. And we do that. We are exploring and developing our characters in an interesting way. I think one of the things is there's a fair bit of freedom on Portland. For example, we have this one sub-forum called the Lower Decks, and that's basically anyone can run their own mission. You can run your own little mission, you can invite other players, you can bring people in, that sort of thing. It's for stuff that's, happening, but it's not really happening at the same time or the same place as the main mission. So, while all the officers are running around saving the ship and that kind of thing, you might be in the back, you might be posting something in the lower decks about trading your stem bolts and Yammock sauce up to land, or baseball cards, or whatever they wound up getting in the end of the episode.
So it's kind of like a device for subplots, is that right? So,
yeah,
like, for example, so you have your main plot going on in the mission, and then if you want to run a subplot at the same time, you can go down to the lower decks and post your subplot.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and I mean, the subplot doesn't even have to be in the same time, right? You can say, like, oh, this happens, 2 weeks after this mission is over, when things are, have quieted down a little bit. I'm on the holodeck, and oh no, I'm trapped on the holodeck. That kind of thing. It's a place where players have a lot of freedom to do that, and that's one of the unique things about forums. I mean, that idea is something that I came up with when I was running this independent sim, and I kind of brought it over to Obsidian Fleet with me when I became a CO, and I don't think there's many other sims that do that. And there's a few other things that make the Portland unique. We're a Miranda-class ship, so we're pretty old, and we're also using the ship a fair bit for testing new prototypes, that sort of thing. So it gives the engineers some new toys to play with and some new gadgets to play around with, and that's something that's interesting. And I think it's also one where we're really, we're not that uptight about things like canon and that kind of stuff. We're really focused on dramatic principles, going back to telling cool and interesting stories. I like to say my whole approach is to step a little bit away from what would my character do and go to what could my character do that would be cool and interesting in the moment. And also the other interesting thing about Portland at the moment is that there are a fair number of romantic subplots going on. I suspect it's because of my XO's appreciation for romance novels.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned that before. I guess you got kind of like the Love Boat,
Yeah.
the old school Federation starship, where you guys just develop relationships, and that's real cool. Um, I think that's something that's often overlooked in a lot of sci-fi, not only films but fan fiction, books, comics, pretty much any type of media dealing with space travel. Where you put a bunch of people in a tin can,
Yeah.
more or less, and you send them out into space to go explore. I mean, let's be honest. There's going to be a lot of sex.
Yeah, yeah. I
Because
mean,
being out there, I mean, that's real stressful. Like, I don't think the average person can really comprehend how stressful and uh, how unorthodox and how confined um, the situation is when
yeah,
you're in a ship and you're just traveling through the cosmos, and you're literally excuse me, you're traveling through the most inhospitable place known to mankind. You're
oh
traveling
yeah,
through space, so it's completely unforgiving. um, you know
yeah,
the prospect of death is literally just a busted bulkhead away. So
yeah. I'm very surprised that Naomi Wildman was the only child born on Voyager.
yeah. Yeah, I think I don't know. I think they. Who knows what was going on with that? I guess I actually wanted to talk about Voyager in the podcast tonight, but I think that's just a whole issue. I think we could actually cover like Voyager in 2 or 3 podcasts if we
Yeah,
spaced it out, and I don't think we have the time for it tonight. But yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot more sex and relationships and casual relationships, more importantly, I think,
yeah,
taking place than what is actually portrayed in the shows.
yeah,
So, but yeah, so I'm all for it, man. I do the same thing with Galileo. We're all about
yeah,
relationships, having a good time, just kind of live in the moment. Don't take anything for granted. Just live your life one day at a time, and just be in that spirit of exploration. So not only are we exploring kind of the cosmos around us, but we're exploring ourselves and we're exploring each other. And I think once you get a good combination of all that going on, then you have a real proper Star Trek sim that kind of goes with the same ideals and philosophies that Gene Roddenberry originally kind of envisioned for the series.
yeah, yeah. Definitely.
So, yeah, I think now would be a good time to jump into our next topic. He actually talked about this a little bit, just touched on it a little bit during our last segment here. We were talking about your sim. Um, I want to talk about some of the out of character work that we do for our games and some of the philosophies that we use to run our sims. And you actually mentioned, not doing, not thinking about what my character would do in the situation, but what my character could do.
Yeah,
And I think that was a very interesting way of looking at RPGing. And you've actually taken the time to write a couple of different articles about simming and about RPGing, and one of those articles was actually a pretty good. It was actually a really big hit on the what was it, the Other Worlds.
ongoing worlds.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the Ongoing Worlds website, and I think it got published there, and you put it up on your own newsletter, and we actually had a discussion about it, a group discussion here on Galileo, and you were talking about metagaming.
yeah,
And the title of your article was that metagaming was good, and you
yeah,
kind of went on a little bit to talk about some of the benefits of metagaming and how it can actually have a positive influence on a sim, as opposed to just having that pure, strictly forbidden, like negative type of aspect that a lot of people think of here in Obsidian Fleet when they hear the term metagaming. And so, if you don't mind, I'd like you to actually talk about this a little bit, kind of give us some inside perspective onto your thoughts behind the whole issue of metagaming.
Well, I think metagaming has a bad rap, to be honest.
And
In
why is
both,
that?
well, in both tabletop games and in simming, it's widely considered, metagaming is something that is bad. You shouldn't be doing it. You should be getting right into your character, block out any out of character influences on your character, that sort of thing. Don't be using any out-of-character knowledge. And, part of it is my experience with tabletop role-playing games, in which I originally approached it from a very simulationist perspective, and I had a lot of trouble both as a player and as a DM. It just wasn't working. And I found with the group that was approaching it from a more narrativist-focused style, where you focus more on the story and less about it as a simulation, and things just started moving a lot smoother. And I think metagaming is important, and despite the fact that people talk about how metagaming is bad, we wind up doing it all the time. How many times on the Galileo in the past couple of weeks has someone said, "Oh, let's do a JP. Okay, now how can our characters know each other? How can we figure out a way to get our characters together?" That's metagaming there. It's using your out-of-character knowledge and your out-of-character influences to try to create a good scene and try to create a good game. And I think it's something that, it's got a bad rap because, I suppose ideas of people using it for superhero Mary Sue kind of stuff, but I think that it's actually something that's really necessary to any game, because without metagaming, any D&D game would rapidly end up as 4 people sitting at separate tables in a tavern, while not talking to each other, while the big bad evil guy comes in and takes over the world, right?
Yeah, I could definitely see what you're saying. I think you're right in that there's always an aspect of role play where you do have to collaborate out of character, and
Yeah.
I think you brought up some great examples. Doing some out of character brainstorming to kind of plan a JP, kind of figure out what the basic premise is going to be for it and how people more or less want the JP to go. I think that's always a good idea. I think the opposing argument would be more along the lines of, if you have, let's say for example, we're doing one of our main plot joint posts, right? And we've got a whole team together, and we're trying to make our way through, I don't know, let's say we boarded a starship and we're trying to make our way to the bridge, and along the way we have to encounter a bunch of, different obstacles to kind of get there. And, some of the obstacles might have like solutions to them, that, the game master, kind of develops in their head, like, let's say, for example, maybe, you got some locked doors, so people have to override, some of the circuitry to open up the door, or things like that. So I think the whole argument is that, if you metagame and you explain all this stuff to people ahead of time, then their characters won't react as naturally as they would to the situation if they didn't have that out of character knowledge, because if you put that knowledge in the player's head, then it makes it a lot easier for that character to simply just do the right thing in the situation, as opposed to actually, to the opposite end of the spectrum, where your character doesn't know what's going on, doesn't exactly know what the best course of duty is, so they have to, actually use their brains to kind of think about all the different options available. Which might create a little more intrigue. Maybe some things go wrong, maybe some things don't go as planned. And so you could argue, I think, that if you don't metagame, you could potentially have just as interesting stories, if not even more interesting, right?
Yeah. Well,
at least that's the argument, I think, right? The opposing argument.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of points where I kind of disagree there. I think, first off, I don't think we can actually avoid metagaming, because our characters, we're not spacemen. We're writers sitting here on our laptops, and we've, lots of us have seen all of the shows, so we know what tribbles are, we know what traps are, we know that kind of thing. So I don't think we can really avoid metagaming. I mean, if you have if you have something that's been seen in the show before, then half your players are going to know the solution to the problem already. And the other main thing is, I think, it's more a question of, when you're metagaming, what's your motivation, right? If you're thinking, like, to me, I always bring it back to telling cool and interesting stories, right? So we can look at it and say, okay, we have this locked door, and we have maybe some Klingons on the other side of the door, and we all know that out of character. Would it be more interesting for the story if we were able to get through the door and ran into the Klingons? Would it be more interesting if we were surprised by the Klingons? Would it be more interesting if we surprised them? Would it be more interesting if we just couldn't get through the door and had to go around? I think that's, and that is, a form of metagaming. You're basically using your out-of-character consideration, what would be more interesting for the story, and you're doing it, right? Like, my thing is, a lot of times what the classic example is people who, know where a trap is and say, oh, okay, I know that there's going to be a trap here, so I'm going to have my character walk around there for no reason. That's not really what I'm thinking. I'm thinking more, step out of character, say, okay, would it be more interesting if we avoid the trap? Would it be more interesting if we fall into the trap? Or what would be most interesting? And usually, in fact, it's something kind of halfway between the best and the worst case scenario, because best case scenario, we solve the problem and everything's over. Worst case scenario, we all die and everything's over. So the best way is usually some sort of middling success or not quite total failure that still moves the story forward. So I think that metagaming is good, but you also have to be thinking, why am I doing it? Am I metagaming to make the story better and to make things more interesting, or am I metagaming to make my character a scene-stealing Mary Sue?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good explanation. I think a lot of it kind of depends on the group of players that you have. Kind of how mature they are, how experienced they are, and how used they are to working within your system. Because you know this, and you've kind of mentioned that you bounced around with Tula on a bunch of different sims. You'll run into different games where you'll have game masters and COs who run things completely differently.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge in going from a sim to a sim is kind of figuring out how a certain sim operates, and kind of how much leeway you have as a character. How the character out of character dynamic works. So I think you brought up a good point in that if everybody in your game knows each other well and is comfortable enough with each other and has confidence in each other and trust, then you could potentially have a situation where you could explain the entire plot and every single plot device in it ahead of time, and then just tell your crew to have at it. Be like, hey guys, this is how our story is going to go. These are all the different things that are going to happen. Let's I'm telling you this ahead of time so that we can create an excellent story. And I think in an ideal world, that would be the preferred way to do RPGing. My take on it, however, is a bit different, in that I think, when you kind of reveal too much to players, a lot of times it's not intentional at all. It's completely accidental, or just a character that's not, or a player that's not thinking. They're not thinking enough about the whole issue before they actually start writing. Is that it tends to get abused at times. And so you have actions and things, and actions and thoughts being written that couldn't possibly make sense in character. So, for example, I guess a good example would be here in our current mission that we have. We're doing Legend of Souls, which was a basic investigation of a Cardassian mining facility on the Cardassian border. And if you look at our original mission briefing, It's got the most basic, bare bones information possible. It doesn't exactly say what's going on in the colony. It doesn't explain really what's happening. And then if you go and look at our briefing room on our wiki page, you can just find out a little bit more information, and it kind of makes
Yeah.
reference to the whole issue of the alien souls, right?
Yeah.
But the alien souls were never mentioned in character.
Yeah.
Up until this one, like, kind of JP that we've been doing. All right.
Yeah.
So what actually happened on our game happened actually quite a few times. We were doing briefings and all that stuff, and my character Lyra was trying to brief the team, and we were kind of discussing some of the different possibilities for what could be creating these disturbances on the planet. And there were so many mentions of demons and ghosts that it just kind of blew my mind. Like, I guess maybe it was my wording, because I put in the whole word of metaphysical manifestations. And I guess maybe people just kind of automatically think that means ghost. But I also felt like, there's a little bit of metagaming going on, because people were kind of foreshadowing what was going to happen ahead of time. People wanted to, instead of just going into a situation not knowing what was going on, they wanted to at least have some starting point to be able to start with. And so they kind of worked in whatever they could for the situation. And I think all of the posts were great that we did. All of our briefing posts were fun. I don't think I had to talk to a single person about, putting that out of character stuff, the out of character knowledge into in character. It actually made for great stories, great briefings, great discussions. But I felt like I could kind of see where if I revealed more information about what was going on, people would start to be able to guess kind of what was going to be happening, and kind of foreshadowing and kind of revealing a little bit too much about what was going to happen, which would completely eliminate the whole idea of having a horror mystery mission. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, I think, I haven't read all the way far back to that post. That was before I started, but I mean, it sounds like it also might be you might also have some good foreshadowing going on, so that might also be positive. But I think one of the things that I also mentioned in my article is how to respond to metagaming, and I think a lot of the time, not all the time, you can't always do this, but a lot of the times, instead of saying your character doesn't know that, you can't possibly know that, I use the examples of trolls and fire. Anyone who's familiar with fantasy knows trolls are very tough, but they're weak to fire. And if somebody busts out a torch, instead of saying, you can't do that, your character doesn't know that, you can say, okay, cool move. How do you know about trolls? And now we find out a little something more about this character. We find out that, he's dealt with trolls before, and, that's something that adds to the story and adds to characters. So I think sometimes you can manage to do that, but yeah, I mean, it's also something that, let's face it, when we're bouncing JPs back and forth, it's really easy to correct things if we start, going way off on tangents, or start doing, reacting to wrong things or something like that. It's really easy to make corrections too.
Yeah, it usually is really easy. I don't think it's an issue that should be like harshly punished, or make a character feel uncomfortable. It's happened. I think it's only happened one time on the sim that I've actually had to have a chat with someone, and that was because the person who I was writing with I guess she wrote a tag describing Lyra's motivation for an action, and the only reason she knew that was because I'd had an instant messaging conversation with her and talked about it, but at no point had it been written in character. So I just kind of sent her, I guess it was just like a polite email. I was just like, look, there's obviously no way that your character would know this, and it doesn't make sense to put this tag in there because no one else would know this. So, can you please change it? And it wasn't a big deal at all.
Yeah.
I didn't have to issue any strikes or anything like that. It was, it was just one of those moments where someone was taking some information from a conversation we had on Yahoo, and it was out of character conversation. They applied it in in-character circumstance when it just wasn't appropriate. So I think, I think there is a line. I think there is a time when metagaming has its benefits, but there's also a time where it just completely doesn't make sense in character for like a certain character to say something or to know something about someone else when there's no way that they could know it. And it's one of those things like not only does it just seem weird, but other people are going to be, other writers in that post are going to be kind of looking around and be like, what? Like, how does this character know this? Like, where did that come from? You know what I'm saying? So kind of has that cascading effect a little bit,
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a tool, right? And it can be used for good or evil.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, this is obviously a very very complicated issue. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. I think a lot of it kind of is up to the CO. And like we were talking about earlier, it's kind of up to them and how well they know their crew and how well the crew knows each other. And ultimately, that's part of the responsibility of being a CO, is to create that gaming environment that you feel is best for your players and create that environment that you think your players are going to enjoy the most. Because, if you're kind of like, if you approach the game like, like Stalin, where you just have the iron fist and you don't let anyone have any creativity, and you just kind of suppress all of their ideas, like, nobody's going to have fun. And then the sim's going to die out and players are going to transfer off and it's just going to be a bad experience. But at the same time, if you want a sim that's, complete anarchy, we really don't kind of set guidelines here and there for the way people should be interpreting things, then you're also going to have situations where, players are going to come into conflict with each other, and then it's going to turn into like a big headache for, I guess, not only for you, but for myself or for whoever is the TGCO or the TFCO. So it's that balancing act, man, So.
Yeah. Well, I think also, there's a lot of different styles of approaching it, and, I don't think that other people's style is wrong. Like, I'm obviously an advocate for how I like to run things because I think it's a good way of running things. If I thought that there was a different way that was better, I'd run things that way, right? So I'm kind of an advocate, and I know, like, I probably have a few unorthodox ideas and in Obsidian Fleet, but, I think that's beneficial to... I think it's beneficial to like the fleet and the broader simming community as a whole to talk about these different ideas, and I think it's also beneficial to have that diversity because you can have people who are interested in different experiences, different styles of simming. Some people are into more hardcore, technical, hard sci-fi, canon, gritty stuff. Some people into lighthearted humor stuff. Some people just want their sim to turn into a flying love boat, which the Portland is to some extent. And I think it's great that there's that diversity out there. I mean, for example, there was one of my players came from another fleet where they would actually let and encourage each other to write for each other's characters. And to anyone in Obsidian Fleet, that's just, whoa, that's way out there. That's crazy. But it's something that...
Yeah, it's like sacrilegious, man.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like every time I talk about this kind of stuff, I turn into Martin Luther running around nailing letters to church doors. But, it's a different environment. There's obviously pros and cons to it, but different strokes for different folks. And hopefully, in a perfect world, everyone will be able to find a game that matches their style. And it's great that there's that variety out there, so that exists for people.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's great as well. You got so many different games, especially in Obsidian Fleet. So many different games, so many different ship classes, with different characters and with different GMs. With like different settings and game worlds. I think there's there's something for everybody, I think, if you just look hard enough.
Yeah.
So, and actually, this is a great time segue into our last section. We'll talk about different things, different environments, different game worlds. And what better place to have a good debate about different game worlds than Star Trek Online?
Oh, yes.
And I want to talk about this because I've been playing it a lot recently. I originally played back in 2010, about a year after it was first launched, and I played up until I hit level 50, and then all the content just ended because at the time there was very little content, and especially for the KDF side for the Klingon players, there was virtually no content whatsoever. And once you got past, level 20, then you were just on your own to PvP and to grind and to level up.
Yeah.
And I've recently started playing again. About 2 weeks ago, I started playing a KDF character. I'm playing Lyra, in all of her Orion glory, as in the KDF faction, and she's a bird of prey captain. And I've been kind of exploring the whole Klingon storyline for the game, and it's kind of almost like night and day. It's the same game, the same mechanics are in place from when it first came out, but looking at it 4 years later, like 4.5 years later, there's been a lot of new content added, and most importantly, the content I was interested in was the way that they were using the license, like the Star Trek license, to kind of create the storyline for the game. And there's been some interesting stuff, I think I saw Worf son Alexander get killed in like one of the first 5 missions, and then I had to avenge him. It was kind of a what the fuck moment. And they've thrown a bunch of curveballs into their whole story, and I just, it's fun, it's interesting, it's great to play, but part of me is just wondering if, obviously it's not canon, but it's kind of just like, wow, like did this really happen, type of thing. So I guess what are your experiences with Star Trek Online? Because you told me you're a LTS subscriber.
Yeah.
Or you got the LTS, so you've probably been in the game since the beginning, and I'm sure you probably experienced some of the same things I have. So what do you think about the game? What do you think about its story? And what do you think about how it's progressed overall since it first launched in 2009?
Well, I mean, I haven't been in the game that long. I think I jumped into it in around 2012 or so. But I did get the lifetime subscription. Of course, knowing my luck and Murphy's Law, I got the lifetime subscription shortly before getting bored with it, to be honest. I think that MMOs are, they are what they are. They're really limited from a role-play experience because, first off, you're basically a passenger in a story that someone else has written, right? It's basically, run over here and press F, run over here, shoot some guys, fly around in your ship, press F again, that kind of thing. You're being kind of guided through the story, whereas I find, with simming and role-playing, you're creating the story as you go. So the stories are infinite, and you're
able to basically do whatever you want. And I just find that... And the other thing is there's... at the end of the day, in any MMO, there's not really that much content, right? There is the main storyline, which, in a lot of MMOs, you can hammer through that in a solid weekend or two, just blow through the main storyline. Then beyond that, there is just grinding and for whatever. And a lot of the times that is, maybe an hour worth of content that you do over and over for 100 hours. Yeah, it's a fair bit of content, but it starts getting a little bit bored there. So I kind of drifted away. I drifted back, though, and I'm like, whoa, Earth space dock is different. Everything's all different. But I think it's just something completely different. And to be honest, I think that the whole MMORPG, I'm not sure that it's really
should be considered a role-playing game. I mean, it's an adventure game for sure, and there's a story, but you generally have very little freedom to, go around and tell your own stories, unless you can fall in with unless there's some people who are role-playing in the Star Trek Online chat that I haven't found yet.
Yeah, I think you actually mentioned some of the key points that I also wanted to bring up is that, when you look at the game and actual gameplay mechanics in and of itself, it just follows the traditional MMORPG model, so you have, your basic questing, you've got your side quests, you got your daily grind, you've got your space battles, you got your ground battles, you've got your lockboxes and all that stuff. But none of that is really what Star Trek is about. Like, when it comes down to it, like, Star Trek's not about questing. It's not about side quests. It's not about grinding. Like, Star Trek is about open world exploration, and actually, it's about repercussions for a person's actions. It's about doing the right thing, and it's about exploring yourself and the galaxy. And it's about learning to have to make those tough decisions when you're out there. So it's about character development, and it's about I don't know. I guess I want to say I just don't feel like there's any sense of like morality or or integration when you're actually playing the game. I think it's a real fun game, and I think some of the stories are kind of fun to play, but there's no sense of open worldness to the game.
Yeah.
I always feel like you're confined into just a certain number of star systems, and there's only a limited number of things to do, and there's really nothing that's that like tickles the brain. You know what I'm saying? When you're out there, you never run into any dilemmas. You never run into situations where you just have to do like the heavy dialogue, kind of talk your way through a situation. It's always pulling out a phaser, just blasting away with your ship and blowing up things and collecting items. So it's it looks like Trek. It looks great. It's a phenomenal looking game if you play it, and it sounds like Trek. The audio is really good. I especially love the stuff they did with the Romulans with the singularity cores, where they kind of collapse in on themselves and explode when you blow up a Romulan ship. But it's just kind of missing the heart of Star Trek. Yeah. And I think for me, that's something that regardless of how many new seasons or new episodes that they add to the game, that's for me that's just going to be the main reason why I don't really consider it to be like a proper Trek game. I think it's a great looking game that looks like Star Trek, but at its core, it's not exactly a Star Trek game. Because it doesn't have those moments like you don't play it and have those moments where you feel like you're actually watching the show. And I mean, obviously that's really hard to create, but especially for a video game, but it's one of those things where I just hope that eventually another game developer will come along and have access to the Star Trek license and be able to kind of create a more open world, kind of more I guess traditional roleplay game, a roleplay game where you make decisions for your character and those decisions have impacts throughout the universe, throughout the quadrant. I guess that's kind of what I was looking for when it first started, and I guess it never happened. So but I guess kudos to the Cryptic team because they did do a lot of work. They did add a bunch of content to the game, at least to keep it alive. So those guys have been working hard, but obviously they're part of a larger studio, and their goal is to make money. And they're using the free-to-play model. So
yeah, I think that's an important point too. It is what it is. It's a MMO first, and it's Star Trek second. I mean, you could replace the Klingons with orcs and the ships with seagoing ships, and you pretty much got Warcraft there or whatever. But
yeah, or
I think that
the one they did before that was Champions Online. So the same
Yeah.
engine and everything that they're using for Star Trek Online was the same thing they used for Champions Online.
And I think the other thing where you make a great point is that they got to make money, right? So they make certain decisions in game about their game to encourage you to make money. And I think that's kind of where the game industry is at these days, with games like Candy Crush and Farmville, that sort of thing. They're basically psychologically designed to get you addicted and then get you to bust out the pocketbook, right, to get that cool ship that you wanted because you don't feel like doing 8 months of grinding,
And
So,
it works so
yeah,
well.
I gotta say it works. They're making money. Cryptic's still in business. The folks behind Candy Crush are making money hand over fist off that one.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is what it is. It's an adventure game. It takes you along a story. It's an adventure, but it's something that you don't really have the freedom. And to be honest, I think we're a long way off from really any game where you have that sort of freedom and where you have the world kind of interacting with you. I mean, I'm not a huge gamer, but I think just the limitations of computer technology, right? You're playing, at the end of the day, no matter what, you're playing something that somebody in some studio in California wrote for you. So there's always going to be limitations on that. Whereas when we're simming, we're playing something that we're writing ourselves. So the possibilities are endless there.
Yeah, there's a lot more freedom, isn't there, in simming?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that attracted me to the genre in the first place was that,
Yeah.
your imagination is the limit when you're in simming. And
Yeah.
that was something that you just can't get when you're doing gaming or any other form. I mean, I think even with a tabletop RPG, you're still kind of limited to, the map that you design and the dice rolls and stuff like that. But when you're writing and you're just, you're being a wordsmith, your imagination is a limit. There's really nothing that you can't write. If you could think about it in your head, you could write it down on paper and you can make it happen. And I think that type of freedom and that flexibility is really what attracts all of us to the genre, and especially to Star Trek simming, because that's kind of, like you were talking about earlier, that's what Gene Roddenberry was all about. It was all about pushing the boundaries, exploring different characters, and different concepts and different social issues, and I mean, you name it. He tackled pretty much everything during his run over 20 years in the genre. So
yeah, and with all the mention of the word simming, maybe I should do a little foreshadowing. I wrote a little article about that as well. The word simming.
It's not simming; it's RPGing, right?
I prefer. I like the term collaborative storytelling. I just don't like the term simming, but it's the one that's in use, so I'm kind of stuck with it.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that next time. We're actually at an hour and 10 minutes.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that went by pretty quick, didn't it?
Yeah.
So, I think it's a great time to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Brian, for coming in and joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, man. You're obviously welcome back anytime. It's great to have you in here. And we actually covered a lot of topics and talked about some really good stuff. So for all of you guys listening there at home, thank you again for participating and for, showing an interest in our game. And we look forward to bringing you some more podcasts, some more fun writing, and some more, what was the term, Ryan?
Collaborative storytelling.
Collaborative storytelling.
Yeah.
All right. So for the Galileo, I'm Jay, and I'm here with Brian, and we will see you guys next time.
All right. Catch you later.